Andrea Aternal, The Mystery of Phantom Pain.
So here is a mystery. When we think of surgeries that are most likely to cause long-term pain, we might think of things like invasive cancer treatments, C-sections, or open heart surgery. But amputation of a limb is a surgery that's most likely to lead to long-term pain. Up to 87% of people continue to experience pain months or even years after they've had a limb amputated. And what makes this so mysterious is that most of this pain is experienced in part of the limb that's no longer there. Think about that for a second. Something that's no longer there can still hurt persistently, intensely, and uncontrollably. Imagine feeling your hand cramp, or your foot burn, or your knee ache when you no longer have that hand, foot, or knee. This type of pain is called phantom limb pain. And even though most people who've had a limb amputated are quite familiar with it, few have ever even heard about it. So as part of my research, people who've lost a limb have shared with me just how deeply this pain impacts their lives. They've described to me that they feel like they've lost their independence, that they're mentally drained, but that they're living with this constant and frustrating lack of control. As one person put it, it's like my phantom limb is a child and it's not listening. And like living with a child who doesn't listen, phantom limb pain can be demanding and impossible to ignore. We know that phantom limb pain negatively impacts things like sleep, work, relationships, and mental health. And even though it affects hundreds of thousands of Canadians, we still don't fully understand it. And that's why research in this area is so urgently needed. Now, another thing that's important to note is that not all sensation that a person feels in their phantom limb are painful. People can also experience what are called non-painful phantom sensations. So these are sensations like itching, tingling, warmth or cold, a sense of movement, or even a clear awareness of where their phantom limb is in space. And it's believed that these non-painful phantom sensations are caused by different mechanisms than phantom limb pain, and they often don't require any treatment. Now, one sensation that really fascinates researchers like me is something called phantom limb telescoping. And telescoping is a sensation of the phantom limb gradually shortening over time and eventually retracting completely within the residual limb, that part of the limb that remains after amputation. So I really wanted to learn more about this phenomenon, because as you could imagine, it's like your hand is where your elbow is, except you no longer have that hand or most of your arm. And this is something that affects about 22% of people who've lost a limb. So in my research, I started by asking people who experience it, what's it like? And I was expecting strong reactions. But for the most part, they didn't say it was good or bad. They mostly just said it was odd or strange. Or as one person said, it's just weird. Okay? So what causes something like phantom limb telescoping? Well, there are a few theories. We do believe it's caused by different mechanisms than phantom limb pain or other non-painful phantom sensations like the tingling and itching and those types of sensations. Now, one leading idea is that telescoping reflects the brain trying to adapt to the loss of the limb. So after an amputation, the brain continues to receive information from the part of the limb that's still there, but evidently it stops receiving information from the part of the limb that's now missing. And so in response to that, the brain begins to reorganize its sensory activity, and that might affect how the person perceives the length of their phantom limb. So some researchers believe that the degree of telescoping is an indication of how much adaptation or reorganization is taking place in those sensory areas of the brain. Now, we also know that telescoping seems to be more common in people who've lost an upper limb in comparison to a lower limb. And that too gives us a little bit of an indication of how this reorganization might be taking place, given that the upper limbs are involved in so many more detailed sensory and motor activities in comparison to the lower limbs. But with that, Research isn't all consistent. There's other studies that have not found this evidence for cortical reorganization or reorganization in the brain in those sensory areas, especially in people who have lost an upper limb. Right? But regardless of the reason for telescoping, it can have very real impacts on the people who experience it. Telescoping can affect how a person engages in rehabilitation, how they use their prosthetic arm or leg, and it might also impact how they experience phantom limb pain. So what's the relationship between telescoping and phantom limb pain? Well, the answer to that is complicated because there's some research that suggests that telescoping is associated with the presence of pain. Other research that finds that telescoping is associated with the absence of pain. And then we have other research on top of that that doesn't find a relationship between the two. Why all these differences? Well, it might be because of the type of amputation being investigated, the reason for the amputation, neurological factors, or even other factors that we have yet to measure. But this ambiguity, this uncertainty, is an opportunity. Throughout history, strange and unexplained events have led to breakthroughs. Think of the placebo effect, for example. It was once dismissed as fake, and now we know it's a strong predictor of our medical outcomes. So maybe telescoping is just such a breakthrough. And if we ignore it, we might be missing a key to better understanding phantom limb pain and possibly even alleviating pain in some people. And by that I mean, if telescoping is associated with the presence of pain, then maybe we'd want to develop interventions that specifically decrease telescoping or reduce its occurrence so that those people can experience less pain. Or if the opposite is true, if telescoping is associated with the absence of pain, then maybe we'd want to develop interventions that somehow elicit telescoping so that they can experience less pain. But of course, much more research is needed before we get to that point. So here is the takeaway for today. Phantom limb pain is real, and its impact on people's lives is profound. Telescoping is also real, and while it may be strange, it can help us to better understand why phantom limb pain persists in some people and not in others. So my hope for today is that you've all become a little bit more curious about phantom limb pain and about telescoping, and you now appreciate that while phantom limb pain is a mystery, telescoping might be a clue. So if we continue to ask the right questions and follow this strange sensation, we might be able to unlock new ways to treat pain, improve lives, and make discoveries about the brain we could have never imagined. Thank you.